Welcome back to another deep dive. Today we're really pulling back the curtain on some deeply unsettling histories, stories often hidden, maybe deliberately buried.
Yeah, we're venturing into an account that's incredibly controversial, so much so that it was, well, effectively erased from public view for decades.
It's about uncovering layers, isn't it? Information that, for many people listening, might be completely new, perhaps even shocking.
Exactly. To think of this as a shortcut, if you will, to understanding a really complex and, frankly, often overlooked chapter of the 20th century. We're working from our primary source material today, the Vatican's Holocaust in Croatia by Avro Manhattan.
Right, and our mission, as always, is to unpack the claims, the documented revelations presented within these pages. We're giving you a thorough overview of its arguments, its perspective.
That's the goal. We'll guide you through this material. It's dense, sometimes disturbing. We start with the origins of the conflict in Yugoslavia, move through these chilling accounts of alleged atrocities.
The purported role of the Vatican, which is central to Manhattan's thesis, and then the subsequent efforts, as the source claims, to suppress this whole narrative.
And it doesn't stop there. The source connects these events to patterns supposedly seen later in places like Malta, even Vietnam. It culminates in this, well, quite chilling look at the underlying philosophies described in the text.
And it's absolutely crucial for you listening to remember, we are presenting the information contained within this source material. Our aim is simply to provide a comprehensive understanding of what it claims, what it argues.
Precisely. It's about understanding the source itself.
Okay, so let's start by unpacking the author himself, Avro Manhattan. Who was this figure behind the Vatican's Holocaust?
Well, he was born in Milan, Italy, back in 1914. According to the source, he was quite the intellectual, educated at the Sorbonne in Paris, the London School of Economics, a serious academic background.
But his life took a very independent, maybe even defiant turn quite early on, didn't it?
It certainly seems so. He was actually imprisoned in Italy. Why? For refusing to serve in Mussolini's fascist army. That act alone, tells you something about his convictions early on.
Yeah, that's a significant act of defiance.
And what's really interesting, the source emphasizes how his personal history seems to shape his unique viewpoint. While he was confined up in the Alps, he apparently wrote his first book, surprisingly, on astronomy.
Astronomy. That's unexpected.
Right. But then during World War II, he emerges as this voice of resistance. He operated something called Radio Freedom, broadcasting messages across occupied Europe. Defiant stuff.
Okay, so a resistance feature during the war.
And the source notes this service earned him recognition. He was made a Knight of Malta. It also mentions his aristocratic background, connections to titles like Knight of the House of Savoy, Knight Templar, Knight of the Order of Mercedes.
Wow, so a mix of academic resistor and, well, aristocracy.
It's a fascinating blend. Defiance of totalitarianism, deep academic work, these historical aristocratic ties. The source argues this combination frames him as, and this is the claim, the world's foremost authority on Roman Catholicism in politics.
That's quite the claim, but the background is compelling. It suggests someone with maybe deep insider knowledge, but also a fiercely independent streak.
In his earlier work, The Vatican in World Politics, that was apparently a huge deal. Went through something like 57 editions, translated into major languages, Chinese, Russian, Korean, a global bestseller.
But here's where it gets really pointed for our discussion today.
Exactly. That same book, The Vatican in World Politics, the source states it held the #1 spot on the Vatican's own forbidden index for, get this, 50 to 70 years.
50 to 70 years. That's astonishing.
It is. And the source uses this fact to immediately establish just how challenging, how controversial the claims Manhattan makes really are. It sets the stage for the material we're looking at today.
It certainly underscores a deep institutional resistance to his narrative, doesn't it, if that claim is accurate?
Absolutely. It strongly suggests his work was seen as, well, deeply threatening to the established historical accounts. In this book, we're focusing on the Vatican's Holocaust in Croatia. It explicitly builds on those earlier works. It promises to reveal what it calls the most horrifying religious massacre of the 20th century.
Okay, so that's the foundational context. Extremely controversial author, extremely controversial claims.
That's the setup.
Right, so with Manhattan's background established, let's dive into the core claims, starting with the Vatican's alleged stance on the birth of Yugoslavia after World War I.
The source goes into meticulous detail here. It claims that back in 1917, right in the middle of the Great War, the papal nuncio E. Pacelli, who, remember, later became Pope Pius XII, was involved in secret negotiations with the Central Powers, Germany, Austria-Hungary. The objective, Manhattan contends, was to broker a peace without victory.
Peace without victory. What was the strategic goal there, according to the source?
Well, Manhattan argues it was twofold. First, to save the German and especially the Austro-Hungarian empires from collapsing. The Habsburg Empire in particular was seen by the Vatican, allegedly, as a critical lay partner, a powerful Catholic political entity in Europe.
Okay, preserve the old Catholic Empire. What was the second goal?
Just as crucial, according to Manhattan, to prevent new sovereign states from emerging, specifically places like Czechoslovakia and, critically for this story, Yugoslavia.
Why prevent them?
Because in these new nations, Catholicism would likely be a minority, dominated, as the source puts it, by heretical churches. Protestant in Czechoslovakia, Orthodox in Yugoslavia.
So it highlights these intertwined religious and geopolitical motives the source attributes to the Vatican, a desire to maintain Catholic dominance in the region.
Precisely. Manhattan paints a picture of trying to maintain Catholic political and spiritual supremacy in Central and Eastern Europe.
And the source gets specific about who the Vatican was allegedly working against.
Yes, it details how the Vatican supposedly struck a final blow against various groups dreaming of independence. The Hussite Czechs, that's a reference to Jan Hus, a pre-Reformation figure who challenged Catholic authority, but also Catholic Slovaks, Orthodox Serbs, and Catholic Croats and Slovenes. All of them needed the Austro-Hungarian Empire to break up to achieve their national goals.
So even Catholic groups wanting independence were opposed if it meant breaking up the Habsburg Empire.
That's the claim. Emperor Charles, the last Habsburg ruler, was apparently advised by the Vatican to try and transform the empire into a federation, a sort of last-ditch effort to keep some Catholic-aligned power structure intact.
But it was too late.
Way too late. History tells us President Woodrow Wilson firmly rejected those ideas. He recognized Czechoslovakia and Yugoslavia's independence, and that effectively sealed the Austro-Hungarian Empire's fate.
So the new kingdom, the kingdom of the Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes, later Yugoslavia, was formed. And the Vatican's reaction, according to Manhattan,
deeply unwelcome. The source describes it not just as politically inconvenient, but as a religious aberration not to be tolerated.
A religious aberration. Why that specific language?
Because Orthodoxy became the dominant faith in a country where over a third of the people were Catholic. This demographic reality, the source argues, severely hampered Rome's desire for a powerful, independent Catholic community there.
Okay.
And this situation, Manhattan explicitly claims, ignited a profound, implacable hatred from the Vatican. This hatred, he argues, became the driving force behind its subsequent anti-Yugoslav strategy.
With the ultimate goal being?
The complete destruction of Yugoslavia itself. That's the chilling objective Manhattan attributes to the Vatican from this point forward.
Right. So if the goal was Yugoslavia's destruction, how did the alleged strategy evolve? It wasn't immediate destruction, was it?
No, it shifted. Initially, Manhattan claims the Vatican hoped for a Russian collapse after the revolution. The idea, he says, was to execute a forced Catholic domination of the Balkan Peninsula through the sword of Pilsudski.
Pilsudski, the Polish leader. How would that work?
The grand vision, according to the source, was to create a massive Catholic Danzig-Odessa Polish empire. This huge Polish expansion, if it had happened, would have swallowed up Yugoslavia and other Balkan Orthodox and Protestant areas, completely redrawing the map of Eastern Europe along Catholic lines.
But Pilsudski's push against Bolshevik Russia didn't succeed in that way.
Exactly. His military campaigns ultimately failed to achieve that grand vision, and the wider efforts against the Bolshevik kind of relaxed. This failure, Manhattan says, forced a major tactical shift from the Vatican.
From military force to what?
To what the source calls the destruction of orthodoxy by penetration instead of by force. A different method, yes, but Manhattan stresses the goal remained identical. Undermine and eventually dismantle non-Catholic influence within Yugoslavia.
So what did this penetration strategy look like on the ground? How did it supposedly work?
Manhattan describes it as a more insidious approach. A quiet but determined infiltration of Yugoslav political life. How? Primarily through, quote, ambitious, clerically dominated Catholic politicians in Croatia.
And the aim of backing these politicians?
To subtly but effectively enhance Catholic power within Yugoslavia. And crucially, to stultify and indeed paralyze the Orthodox Church throughout Yugoslavia from the inside. To weaken it, make it ineffective.
Did this strategy have any success, according to the source?
Manhattan claims it achieved no little success. Catholic clericalism apparently gained undue weight in both the regional Croatian administration and the wider Yugoslav government. Influence was slowly being built.
But there was resistance to this.
Yes, and this is a critical point in Manhattan's narrative. He identifies Stephen Radic, the leader of the very powerful Croat Peasant Party, as a major obstacle.
Who was Radic?
Described as an honest Catholic Croat himself, but one who openly defied the Catholic hierarchy and, allegedly, the Vatican's directives. He actively fought against what the source calls these Catholic Trojan horse tactics in politics.
How did he fight them?
He warned Croats that letting politicians be guided by the hierarchy would lead Croatia to disaster. And for nearly a decade, the source claims, his advice was largely followed, which weakened this Vatican penetration strategy.
But then something changed drastically.
A pivotal, tragic turning point, as Manhattan outlines it. In 1928, Stephen Radic was assassinated.
And Manhattan connects this timing to other events.
Absolutely. He claims this assassination perfectly coincided with a general overhaul of Vatican European strategy towards communism, a hardening of the stance.
What else was happening around that time?
The Curia, the Vatican's administrative body, formally broke off talks with Soviet Russia. In Germany, remember Pacelli, the papal nuncio? Manhattan alleges he steered the influential Catholic Center Party sharply to the right, aligning it with the very forces that would, quote, skyrocket Hitler to power.
Wow, okay, so a broader shift towards right-wing alliances.
And crucially, in 1929, the Vatican signed the Lateran Pact with Mussolini, giving fascist Italy formal recognition and significant political benefits. These events, Manhattan argues, collectively marked the end of that subtle penetration phase.
And ushered in
a new, much more aggressive era of active agitation. Not just against Bolshevism anymore, but explicitly and directly aimed at the disintegration of Yugoslavia itself.
So from quiet influence to overt agitation for Yugoslavia's breakup.
Exactly. And this dramatic shift, Manhattan contends, sets the stage for the incredibly disturbing events he details next, the creation of the Independent State of Croatia.
Okay, so the strategy shifts to active agitation. How did this play out in practice, leading to the creation of this Independent State of Croatia, the ISC?
Manhattan claims this new approach quickly yielded a rich harvest for what he calls the Church's fascist associates. While these groups were busy engineering political unrest and even terrorist acts, Catholic diplomacy, he alleges, was working in parallel to promote a powerful Catholic fifth column inside Yugoslavia.
A fifth column. What did that consist of, according to the source?
Several interconnected elements. First, Croats infected with national religious fanaticism, people whose desire for a greater Croatia was deeply tied to their Catholic identity.
Okay, fervent nationalists. Who else?
Second, the Catholic hierarchy of Croatia itself is portrayed as a core part, lending its moral authority, its institutional weight. And third, an illegal nationalist army of what the source calls Catholic terrorists, the Ustashi, led by Ante Pavelic.
And who supported him, according to Manhattan?
He claims Pavelic got crucial backing from two key figures. Vladimir Maček, leader of the Croat Peasant Party. The source alleges Maček received 20 million dinars from Mussolini, specifically for this separatist movement.
Financed by Mussolini.
And critically, support from Archbishop Stepinak, the acknowledged leader of the Catholic hierarchy in Croatia. These key players, Manhattan argues, were central to the Ustashi's rise.
Now, Manhattan makes a distinction here about the Vatican's alleged role in Croatia compared to other fascist regimes, right? Like Petain's France or Franco's Spain.
Yes, this is a key point in his argument. He claims that unlike in those other countries where the Church might have supported existing fascist regimes, in Croatia, the Catholic Church allegedly attempted to erect, and indeed did erect, a state in complete accord with all her tenets.
So not just supporting, but actively creating a state modeled on its doctrines.
That's the assertion. And the result, as Manhattan vividly describes it, was something truly horrifying. He calls it a monster standing upon the armed might of twin totalitarianism.
Twin totalitarianism.
Yes. The totalitarianism of a ruthless fascist state and the totalitarianism of Catholicism. He calls it the most bloodthirsty hybrid yet produced by contemporary society.
That's incredibly strong language.
It is. And the source goes further, claiming this independent Catholic state of Croatia, the ISC, was intended as a model in miniature of what the Catholic Church, had she the power, would like to see in the West and indeed everywhere.
A blueprint for Catholic political power, as Manhattan saw it. A deeply provocative claim.
Extremely. It outlines what he perceived as the ultimate terrifying aspirations of the church's political ambitions.
So how did this monster, as the source calls it, actually come to power? What were the mechanics?
Manhattan details a path littered with international plots, assassinations, and secret deals. He points back to 1933, when an Austrian railway worker discovered what seemed like illegal arms shipments between Austria's Catholic dictator Dollfuss and semi-fascist Hungary.
Okay, an arms deal. But there was more to it.
Manhattan claims the source revealed these arms were actually destined for certain Catholic nationalists of Croatia, meaning the Ustashi, to fuel their fight against Yugoslavia. It turned a regional deal into an international plot, in his words.
And Mussolini's role in all this.
Mussolini, according to the source, had his own grand expansionistic design for the Balkans. He wanted to dismember Yugoslavia and absorb Dalmatia, the coastal region, into fascist Italy.
So his ambitions aligned with the Ustashi's separatist goals.
Perfectly, Manhattan argues. It created this powerful, mutually beneficial alliance between Italian fascism and Croatian Catholic nationalism.
Then came the assassinations. These seem pivotal in the narrative.
Absolutely. Manhattan highlights two key political murders that dramatically shifted the European chessboard. First, Austrian Chancellor Dollfuss, assassinated by Nazis in July 1934.
Right.
Then, just a few months later, October 1934, King Alexander of Yugoslavia himself was assassinated. And who did it? The Ustashi. Ante Pavelic was actually twice sentenced to death in absentia for his alleged role in killing the king.
So the Ustashis were directly involved in regicide.
That's the claim. And these assassinations, Manhattan argues, had major consequences. They led to a kind of unspoken, tacit agreement between Mussolini and Hitler, who hadn't been close before.
How so?
Hitler shifted his strategy. He began to prioritize neutralizing Yugoslavia before launching his wider invasion plans. This calculation, Manhattan contends, directly set the stage for the rapid and brutal events of April 1941.
The invasion and dismemberment of Yugoslavia. And the birth of the independent state of Croatia itself was incredibly fast, wasn't it? A real lightning strike.
It was. Remember, Yugoslavia had an anti-Nazi coup on March 27, 1941, led by General Merkovich. Hitler's response was immediate and savage. Attack launched on April 6th.
And the Ustashi, what was their immediate reaction?
Treachery, according to Manhattan. He claims an Ustashi officer, Colonel Kren, immediately flew from Belgrade to the Nazis, giving them the secret locations of Yugoslav military aircraft.
Leading to their destruction.
Yes, wiped out on the ground. It crippled Yugoslavia's air defenses right at the start.
And Pavelic himself.
His actions were just as quick and unambiguous. He went on the radio, addressed the Croats directly. His message, as quoted in the source, was chilling. Croat soldiers, use all your weapons against all the Serbian soldiers and officers. We are already fighting shoulder to shoulder with our new allies, the Germans and the Italians.
A direct call to turn on their fellow Yugoslavs alongside the invaders.
Unequivocal betrayal, as Manhattan presents it. A clear declaration of allegiance to the Axis powers.
But the source alleges betrayal went even higher, even within the Yugoslav government itself.
Astonishingly, yes. Manhattan details how Vlatko Micek, who is the vice president of the Yugoslav government, a prominent Croat and a Catholic, allegedly deserted his post during the invasion.
Deserted? And did what?
Plotted directly with Mussolini, Manhattan claims, to set up this Catholic fascist state of Croatia. The source even alleges Micek had already been paid 20 million dinars by Mussolini back in 1939 for this very purpose.
Premeditated plotting financed by Italy.
That's the accusation, and it wasn't just him. Other Catholic ministers in the government allegedly shared critical defense secrets with Nazi intelligence, gutting their own nation's defenses from the inside.
So widespread internal betrayal facilitating the collapse.
That's the picture Manhattan paints. Which brings us to April 10th, 1941.
The official proclamation day.
Yes. Slavko Braternik, a top Ustashi figure, formally proclaimed the independent state of Croatia, and Archbishop Stepinak's reaction, according to the source.
What did he do?
Immediately called on all Croats to support the new Catholic state. Manhattan details how Stepinak personally met with Pavelic. He didn't just congratulate him, he reportedly offered his blessing for what Stepinak called Pavelic's life work.
His life work being the creation of this state.
The creation of what the source bluntly calls perhaps the most ruthless fascist tyranny ever to dishonor Europe. Stepinak's support was apparently public and unwavering. On April 28th, he issued a pastoral letter, read out even from Zagreb Cathedral at Easter, demanding all Croatian clergy support and defend the new Ustashi state.
Wow. That depicts incredibly deep institutional church involvement right from the very beginning.
That's precisely the narrative Manhattan constructs.
Okay, so the ISC is established, allegedly with the church's blessing. What did the actual mechanics of terror look like on the ground, according to Manhattan?
He describes Pavelic immediately setting up a systematic structure of control and violence. Ustashi branches were organized, the source names them, Stozer, Logor, Tabor, Zbir, essentially local cells, regional commands.
A hierarchy of terror.
Is designed, Manhattan says, to initiate a veritable reign of terror. And the objective was stark. Total extermination of all non-Catholic anti-fascist elements within the new state's borders.
How was this enforced? What kind of state apparatus was created?
A political police force modeled, the source claims, directly on the Nazi Gestapo and Mussolini's OVRA. It was called the Ustashka Nadzorna Sluzba, the Ustashi Supervisory Service.
A Gestapo equivalent.
With 13 different types of police forces designed to penetrate every corner of society. Manhattan also describes the immediate creation of courts extraordinary, the Project Sud, or mobile courts.
What was extraordinary about them?
According to the source, they completely bypassed due process. They passed only death sentences, no defense allowed, no right of appeal, often based on vague charges of collective responsibility.
Just instruments of extermination, essentially.
Manhattan claims they condemned huge numbers of people, sometimes in minutes. Veritable instruments of extermination operating under a thin veneer of legality.
And concentration camps.
Yeah.
Were they part of this?
Yes. The source states this legalized terror was further cemented by statutory order on September 25, 1941. It mandated compulsory detention in concentration camps for anyone deemed an undesirable and dangerous person. Again, no appeal.
Just arbitrary detention leading to.
A framework for arrests, indefinite detention, and ultimately systematic murder, all sanctioned by the state's own laws, as Manhattan alleges.
But here's the most damning part of Manhattan's claim.
Yeah.
The alleged role of the Catholic Church itself in this machinery.
Yes, the source is absolutely unequivocal here. It asserts the Ustashi were morally and financially encouraged and supported by the Church. It goes further, claiming priests, monks, even bishops formed the very backbone of the Ustashi movement.
How so? In what ways?
Manhattan provides specific examples. Monasteries, he claims, were used as clandestine Ustashi headquarters long before the invasion, places for planning. Religious events, like Eucharistic congresses, were allegedly used as cover for separatist political and military activities.
Using religious activities as a screen.
That's the claim. He also states that Catholic organizations, like the Crusaders and Catholic Action, had members actively involved in sabotage, terrorism, even disarming the Yugoslav army.
Or specific clergy named.
Yes. The source names priests like Father Radoslav Silavas and Father Chaplain Ivan Miletic, claiming they didn't just get military training, but actually led Ustashi guerrilla units in the field.
So, not just moral support, but active armed participation alleged.
It depicts a deeply integrated, systematic collaboration between elements of the church hierarchy and clergy and the Ustashi regime's terror apparatus. That's the core assertion.
Now we move into what Manhattan describes as the absolute nightmare of this period. The policy of extermination and the specific atrocities in the ISC. This is incredibly difficult territory.
It is. The source claims the very foundation was this quote, allegedly from Ustashi minister Mile Budak in July 1941. The movement of the Ustashi is based upon the Catholic Church.
Based on the church.
That linkage, Manhattan argues, directly led to what the source calls 100% racialism and 100% Catholicism, horrifyingly reinforcing each other's goals.
How did this manifest in daily life?
Signs started appearing, the source claims, saying things like, entry forbidden to all Serbs, Jews, Gypsies, and dogs. The Minister of Interior, Andrija Artukovic, allegedly issued a decree. Serbs and Jews had 12 hours to leave Zagreb. Anyone caught sheltering them would be executed.
Just brutal, immediate ethnic cleansing.
And the demographics are crucial here. Out of 6.7 million people in the region, only 3.3 million were Croats. There were 2 million Orthodox Serbs, 700,000 Muslims, 45,000 Jews. The Ustashi dream of a greater Croatia included areas with these non-Catholic populations.
Making them immediate targets for elimination.
Swift elimination, as the source puts it.
What about forced conversions? Was that part of the strategy?
Yes, the source claims it became standard practice and it was legally sanctioned. Conversion to Catholicism offered a perverse kind of immunity protection from arrest, seizure of property, even execution for these new Catholics.
But was it genuine conversion or just survival?
Manhattan argues it was a tool of control and elimination. The official policy, declared by Ustashi Minister Mirko Pok, was blunt. the total annihilation of the Orthodox Church. This intertwining of religious and racial motives is central to Manhattan's account of the atrocities.
The scale and brutality. The source provides specific examples.
Horrifyingly specific examples. Victims executed on bridges, bodies dumped in rivers. Glina, May 1941. 600 Orthodox males reportedly killed with guns, knives, sledgehammers. Gudovac, April 41. 200 Serb peasants killed.
Entire regions laid waste.
Places like Bosanska Krajina, Lika, Kordun, completely laid waste by so-called punitive expeditions. The source describes Jadovno and Lika. Victims wired together, the first one killed, dragging the others, still alive, down a 1,000-foot cliff.
That's unimaginable.
The village of Jakovia, 1945. Razed, most inhabitants murdered. Virgin most, August 3, 1941. Over 3,000 Serbs massacred in one day. Bosanska Krupa district, summer 41. 540 women and children burned alive in their homes. Prijedor, July 31st, August 1st, 41. 1,400 men, women, children massacred overnight. The numbers are staggering.
And the methods. The source details torture and mutilation.
Yes, and it's extremely graphic. The Ustashi allegedly specialized in crushing skulls with hatchets or hammers. Italian soldiers, the source claims, took photos, one reportedly showed an Ustashi wearing 2 necklaces, one made of gouged out eyes, the other of torn out tongues of murdered Serbs.
Look.
Witness testimony from Gorovac, September 41, cited in the source, 3-year-old children impaled, mothers and children impaled together, girls with breasts mutilated, men with ears, noses sawn off, eyes gouged out.
Crucifixions, too.
Accounts of crucifixions, yes. A former MP, Luka Vramovic, and his son allegedly crucified and burned alive. Manhattan even mentions a photo supposedly found on a dead Ustashi soldier showing victims being sawn in half before execution. It points to extreme sadism.
And the clergy's alleged role in these acts, beyond organization.
Manhattan claims direct involvement was widespread. Quote, many of the Ustashi formations were officered by Catholic priests, and often by friars, who had taken an oath to fight with dagger and gun for the triumph of Christ in Croatia.
Welcome to Urban Odyssey, where independent research unveils hidden truths and the deepest mysteries. Explore my bio.link page at bio.link/officialurban for free research materials like PDFs, books, documentaries, links, and all my social media profiles. Dive into my channels for diverse video content, live events, and movie nights. Discover tons of content on my Substack at theofficialurban.substack.com. Support my work with a $5 monthly membership or $50 yearly for extra notes and deep dives. 80% of my content stays free. Find Urban Odyssey on all major podcast platforms for audio resources, deep dives, and interviews. Visit bio.link/officialurban and theofficialurban.substack.com for more.
Priests and friars as military officers in these units.
That's the claim. He specifically points to the Jasenovac concentration camp, the pit of death, he calls it, claiming its horrors equaled Dachau. And who ran it? Figures like the Franciscan monk, Father Filipovic.
Jasenovac, the numbers there.
The source alleges over 24,000 Orthodox children were held there in 1942 alone, 12,000 of them murdered. It recounts a chilling story of an Ustashi guard, Ante Urban, protesting he'd only killed 63 children when accused of killing 100. Just horrifying.
Were other priests named as commanders?
Yes, the source names several. Father Zvonko Bakal at Jasenovac reportedly decorated for his actions. Father Gruga Blazevic at Bosanski Novi Camp. Brother Tugomir Soldo, who Manhattan claims directly organized massacres.
And individual atrocities attributed to clergy. Many are detailed. Canon Ivan Mikan allegedly beat Orthodox Serbs with a bullwhip, ordered looting. Priest Anton Juric ordered villages plundered and burned, 150 murders attributed to him. Franciscan priests tortured and killed 25 Serbs, supposedly took photos. Priest Ante Pavelic personally led Ustashi units in attacks. Priest Marko Zovko held responsible for new 100 murders. Franciscan Mio Kujic instructed Ustashi units carrying out massacres that not one person was allowed to remain alive.
Just unbelievable brutality alleged.
Perhaps one of the most chilling accounts is Father Sreko Peric of Gorica Monastery. The source quotes him allegedly saying from the pulpit, "Kill all Serbs, and when you finish, come here to the church, and I will confess you and free you from sin." An exhortation Manhattan claims directly resulted in 5,600 deaths in that region.
And the Orthodox clergy themselves, were they specifically targeted?
Absolutely. Manhattan describes it as a systematic campaign. Orthodox priests were hunted, imprisoned, massacred. Hundreds perished, including bishops.
Can you give examples from the source? Father Branko Dobrosavljevic, allegedly forced to read his own son's obituary after the son was mutilated, then tortured and killed himself. Father Babic, reportedly knifed all over, then buried alive standing upright. Bishop Platon of Banja Luka, beard torn out, fire lit on his chest, killed with hatchets, body thrown in a river. Bishop Dositej of Zagreb, tortured until he went insane. 3 Orthodox bishops murdered in total, according to the source. It clearly points to the religious dimension of the violence.
What was the reaction of the Nazis and Italian fascists to all this?
Yeah.
They were allies of the Ustashi.
This is one of the most astonishing claims in Manhattan's book. Even the Ustashi's ideological allies, the source states, were horrified at the Ustashi atrocity.
Well, horrified. The Nazis and fascists.
Yes. The Nazis reportedly set up special commissions just to investigate the Ustashi excesses. The Serbian Orthodox Church, in desperation, actually appealed to a Nazi general, Dulkman, to intervene.
They intervened.
Both Italian and German authorities, Manhattan claims, were so appalled by the scale and nature of the massacres that they actually stepped in. They deprived the Ustashi of the command of whole regions and sometimes ousted them altogether, replacing them with their own troops just to stop the terrible individual and mass murders.
So the violence was extreme even by Nazi standards.
That's the stark implication Manhattan draws.
And the overall death toll. Manhattan gives estimates.
He claims that just within the first 3 months, from April to June 1941, 120,000 people perished thus. Proportionally, given the time frame and the small territory, he calls it the greatest massacre to take place anywhere in the West during that entire World War II period.
A staggering claim. And you mentioned something about selectivity and conversions.
Yes, adding another layer to the alleged religious cleansing. Manhattan claims the Ustashi government, supposedly based on an agreement with Archbishop Stepinak, deliberately refused to accept Orthodox intellectuals, businessmen, wealthy peasants into the Catholic Church via conversion.
Why refuse them?
They only accepted the poor Orthodox population for conversion. This suggests, Manhattan argues, a very calculated policy. Not genuine conversion, but a strategic elimination or subjugation of the Orthodox leadership and middle class, while absorbing the less threatening poor. Religious, class, and intellectual extermination intertwined.
Chillingly strategic, if true.
Yeah.
Okay, after laying out these horrific accounts, Manhattan turns the focus squarely onto the Vatican itself. What's the core claim about its role?
He makes a profoundly provocative assertion that the Vatican was the true inspirer, promoter, and executor of the religious massacres. That's a direct quote from the source.
The true inspirer. How does he support that?
The argument is that the mass murders carried out by individuals apparelled in clerical garb truly were instigated from the archiepiscopal palaces of the Catholic hierarchy. He claims the hierarchy knew it approved and tacitly encouraged the sanguinary task.
Proved and encouraged.
And crucially, Manhattan emphasizes that, according to his research, not a single member of the clergy involved was ever disciplined or called to account by the church authorities during the ISC's existence. He sees this lack of action as deeply implicating.
But could the Pope himself, Pius XII, have been unaware? Could he plead ignorance?
Manhattan argues forcefully, absolutely not. He cites the easy and constant communication lines between Rome and Croatia, even during the war. Ustashi leaders, both political and religious, apparently traveled back and forth between Zagreb and Rome frequently. Croatia was a Nazi satellite. Travel was possible.
So communication wasn't an issue. What specific channels of information did the Pope allegedly have?
Manhattan lists several direct channels. First, reports from the papal legate in Croatia, Msir Marconi. He was Pius XII's personal representative on the ground.
And what does the source claim about Marconi?
That he didn't just know, he participated. Allegedly, openly blessed the Ustashi, publicly gave the fascist salute, and even explicitly instigated religious persecution. The source claims he prayed for an Ustashi victory under the leadership of the head of the state, Pavelic, directly against the partisans. A clear alignment.
Okay, that's one channel. What else?
Second, Cardinal Thizerin. He headed the Holy Congregation of Eastern Churches, a key Vatican department dealing with Eastern Rite Catholics and Orthodox relations. Thizerin, the source claims, received detailed reports of every forcible conversion and massacre in Croatia.
Received reports of everything. And his reaction.
This stunning. Despite knowing, allegedly, that over 100,000 Orthodox Serbs were massacred between April and June 41 alone, Teaserin apparently declared in July 41 great hopes for the conversion of those who are not of the true faith in Croatia. Manhattan presents this as utterly callous disregard for the ongoing slaughter.
Great hopes for conversion amidst massacres.
Exactly.
A third channel of information.
Direct reports from Ante Pavelic himself, the Ustashi leader. The source claims Pavelic sent regular updates to Pius XII, sometimes delivered directly by his minister of religions.
Updates about what?
About the rapid progress of Catholicizing the new Croatia. Essentially, Manhattan alleges, framing the forced conversions and destruction of the Orthodox Church as a successful spiritual project for the Pope's benefit.
And finally, perhaps the most direct link alleged.
Archbishop Stepinak, the head of the Croatian Catholic hierarchy. He personally visited Pius XII in Rome at least twice during this period.
Visited the Pope in person. And what did they discuss, according to the source?
Manhattan claims Stepinak provided His Holiness with specific figures on the forced conversions. He cites an official document dated May 8, 1944, where Stepinak allegedly reported to the Pope that 244,000 Orthodox Serbs had been converted to the Church of God.
Specific numbers delivered directly to the Pope.
If true, that level of direct reporting from the key Catholic figure on the ground, detailing the scale of forced conversions, would profoundly implicate the Vatican leadership in full knowledge and, Manhattan argues, tacit approval of the entire brutal campaign.
Manhattan also mentions Catholic organizations and convents being involved.
Yes, he claims organizations like Caritas were used to rebaptize heretics inside convents. He even mentions alleged photos of Pavelic at children's homes used for rebaptizing Orthodox orphans, and photos of Pavelic with nuns in convents involved in this Catholicization drive.
And convents hiding Ustashi.
Allegedly, yes. Manhattan claims that even before 1941, convents were used to secretly hide Ustashi terrorists, their printing presses, and weapons, suggesting a long-standing, deep-seated collaboration.
Okay, fast forward to the end of the war. Ustashi Croatia collapses. What role does the source claim the Vatican played then?
A significant and direct one, Manhattan alleges, in facilitating the escape routes, the infamous rat lines, and protecting war criminals.
Like Pavelic himself.
Pavelic, for instance, is said to have hidden for a time at the Vatican itself, right under the Pope's nose, before fleeing to Argentina disguised as a monk. There, he set up an Ustashi government in exile, and the source states bluntly, sundry Catholic hierarchies openly helped him in exile, widespread support.
And this claim about Pavelic being captured by the Americans.
It's truly remarkable. Manhattan's source asserts Pavelic was captured by U.S. forces near Salzburg after the war, but then a mysterious intervention by Pope Pius XII, supposedly working through Stepinak and the Archbishop of Salzburg, secured Pavelic's unconditional release.
Released, preventing him from facing trial as a war criminal.
Exactly, despite the mountains of evidence regarding the atrocities under his rule. That's the extraordinary claim.
Where did other fleeing Ustashi leaders go?
Manhattan claims monasteries and convents, particularly in Rome, became safe havens. He notes a curious detail from observers at the time. Some of the nuns seen in these places were described as having a rough appearance, masculine demeanor, and appeared to be unshaven.
Suggesting they were disguised Ustashi men.
Strongly suggesting that, yes. Manhattan sees this as proof of the efficiency of the Vatican campaign to protect these individuals, a highly organized institutional effort.
Are other key figures mentioned as being helped?
Yes. Franz von Papen, prominent German Catholic politician, Hitler's vice-chancellor, was allegedly saved by Pius XII's intervention, and Father Krunislav Draganovic, a Franciscan priest, Ustashi official, and Pavelic's envoy to the Vatican, is singled out.
What did Draganovic allegedly do?
He's accused of being a key organizer of the rat lines, providing money, food, housing, and crucially forged Red Cross passports to help Ustashi war criminals escape justice.
Was Vatican money involved in this, according to the source?
Manhattan cites specific intelligence memos. An OSS memo from 1946, that's the precursor to the CIA, claimed a massive sum, 200 million Swiss francs, about $170 million today, originating from the Ustashi treasury, was being held in the Vatican for safekeeping.
And rumored to be used for what?
To finance the escape and ongoing activities of these war criminals. A British memo from 1947 apparently mentions a priest converting Ustasha gold and jewelry into Italian currency. The British Foreign Office even reported in 1947 that Pavelic himself was living within the Vatican City. Other documents suggested Ustashas were eating at the papal mess, driving Vatican cars.
These are incredibly specific and serious allegations of direct financial and logistical support at the highest levels.
They are. Manhattan presents them as evidence of deep complicity.
Given these alleged actions, how does Manhattan describe the post-war handling of this history? Was there an effort to cover it up?
He describes a systematic, long-term campaign of denial and minimization. Initially, he says any rumors about the massacres were just dismissed as anti-Catholic propaganda.
How was the truth suppressed? Any specific examples?
He mentions a Dr. Miloš Sekulic, who tried to bring documents to London, including appeals from the Serbian Orthodox Church to the Nazis, about 180,000 killed by August 41. His mission was allegedly sabotaged when a devout Catholic Croat minister in the Yugoslav government in exile cut his funding.
Sabotage from within the exiled government.
And that exiled Yugoslav government itself, Manhattan claims, made a conscious decision to suppress the news. Facing internal splits between Serb, Croat, and Slovene Catholic members, they decided not to publish the news of the massacres and even to deny altogether that they had occurred.
Why deny them?
To maintain a fragile unity against Hitler, Manhattan argues the truth of the atrocities was sacrificed for political expediency.
What about the media? Did the story get out eventually?
News did leak to the British press. The News Chronicle, Daily Telegraph ran articles. But Manhattan claims his own book on the subject, Terror Over Yugoslavia, was largely ignored by the British and American press. A media blackout, essentially.
Why would that happen?
He quotes Mrs. Eleanor Roosevelt observing something quite chilling. "The Catholic Church is still here with us, more powerful than ever. With her own press and the world press at her bidding, anything published about the atrocities in the future will not be believed." Manhattan attributes this silence to the Church's immense influence.
Did this alleged denial continue long after the war?
Manhattan asserts it did, pointing to a surprising rapprochement between the Vatican and Tito's communist Yugoslavia later on.
The Vatican and communist Yugoslavia becoming friendlier.
Yes. And this reconciliation, the source claims, led directly to the Yugoslav embassy in London refusing to support new editions of Manhattan's exposé. It allegedly involved a general amnesty for Catholic collaborators, clergy included, allowing them back into public life without facing justice.
Who negotiated this deal?
Msur F. Sieper, who succeeded Stepinak as Archbishop of Zagreb. Sieper was later promoted to cardinal and eventually headed the Sacred Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, the modern successor to the Inquisition. Manhattan presents this as a strategic move to bury the past.
So, a relentless Vatican pressure machine, as he calls it.
That's his term. He claims it worked continuously to suppress memories of the Croatian Holocaust, even in Protestant countries. Ustashi living in exile were allegedly supported by local Catholic clergy and protected by laws in various countries that hindered extradition.
Like the case of Artukovic, the interior minister.
Exactly. Andrija Artukovic lived peacefully in the U.S. for over 40 years, extradited only in 1986 after a huge legal fight. And Manhattan points out that media coverage of his conviction focused on the mass murder of Jews, Gypsies, and others, but crucially, he claims, never mentioned the religious motivation or blamed the Catholic Church.
Why the omission?
Manhattan attributes it to influence from the U.S. State Department and the papal ambassador, a deliberate downplaying of the religious dimension, he argues.
And the beatification of Cardinal Stepinak in 1998. How did it fit in?
Manhattan highlights this as profoundly significant. Pope John Paul II beatified Stepinak despite his documented alleged support for the Ustashi regime and the atrocities. Manhattan sees this as a powerful modern symbol of the Church affirming its stance, effectively absolving Stepinak and, by extension, the Vatican's role in the eyes of the faithful.
Does the source claim this influence continued even more recently, helping Ustashi remnants?
Yes, it claims the Vatican continued to aid scattered Ustashi groups, with underground HQs reportedly in Madrid and Rome. It even mentions a Franciscan monk, Father Rudy Jarek, arrested for recruiting members for these groups from a Zagreb monastery.
Still active recruitment.
And influence on legislation. The source alleges Catholic bodies and politicians in countries like Australia, Canada, the USA worked to pass laws protecting these war criminals from arrest or extradition. A long-term systemic effort to shield them, according to Manhattan.
Okay, this brings us to a really crucial part of Manhattan's argument, the idea of a repeating pattern. He uses other countries as case studies.
Exactly. He argues that what happened in Croatia wasn't unique, but part of a larger pattern of religious and political interference. He uses Malta, specifically the 1962 election, as a prime example.
Malta. What allegedly happened there?
The source presents it as a stark case of the Catholic Church using its immense religious authority to overtly manipulate a democratic election, disregarding basic democratic principles to ensure its preferred political outcome.
How did they allegedly do this? What methods?
A whole range of tactics,
Yeah.
influencing civil authorities, hampering the opposition Labor Party, Catholic police, even the election commissioner were supposedly handpicked by the church.
Direct interference. What else?
Priests allegedly organized religious political expeditionary Catholic gangs specifically to break up Labor Party meetings, sometimes using children with hooters and whistles to drown out speakers.
Disrupting opposition rallies.
And even sonic warfare. In one town, Lucca, church bells were reportedly told nonstop for 3 hours during a labor rally, deliberately deafening the crowd and silencing the speakers.
Wow, what about psychological pressure?
Pervasive, according to the source. Posters on churches saying, "Vote as directed by the diocesan junta. God will be watching you. And even if you vote for the enemy of the church, you will be defying God." Parish priests sent personal letters pressuring voters. Even the sick and elderly were mobilized to vote the church's way.
And direct spiritual threats.
This is perhaps the most extreme claim. Priests allegedly told people it was a mortal sin to vote Labor, based on direct instructions from the Archbishop. Confessors were ordered to deny absolution to anyone who admitted voting Labor,
Weaponizing the confessional for politics.
turning it into a political confabulation, as the source puts it. Severe canonical penalties like personal interdiction, cutting people off from sacraments, were used against Labor leaders.
Even after death.
In one grim example, the Labor deputy leader, Joseph Mercer, was allegedly denied a Christian burial by the church and his body placed in a refuse dump, a final public act of vengeance.
How did the campaign peak?
Newsagents forbidden to sell opposition papers. Catholics threatened with denial of sacraments if they didn't comply. Crucifixes draped in mourning paraded with captions like, "Why are you voting against me?" Priests, nuns, monks chanting at polling stations.
And the outcome.
The church won. Manhattan uses Malta to argue this shows the extent of religious manipulation possible even in a supposedly democratic context.
Then he shifts to Vietnam in the early 1960s. How does he connect that conflict to this pattern?
He claims the roots of the Vietnam tragedy lie significantly in the Catholic Church's religious and ideological influence. He focuses on what he calls the Catholic trio.
The Catholic trio. Who were they?
President Mingo Dinh Diem, who is Catholic, his brother Ngo Dinh Nhu, head of the secret police, and their other brother, Ngo Dinh Thuc, the Archbishop of Hue. This trio, the source alleges, was determined to impose the religious and political writ of the church upon a non-Christian culture, namely the Buddhist majority of South Vietnam.
So Demon's rule is portrayed as religiously motivated.
As a virtual Catholic dictatorship, Manhattan calls it, used to crush his religious and political opponents with the utmost ruthlessness. He controversially claims Diem's was essentially planted in power by figures like the powerful American Cardinal Spellman and even Pope Pius XII himself.
Implying direct Vatican involvement in setting up the regime.
Yes, setting the stage for the brutal persecution of Buddhists that followed, according to the source.
What did that persecution look like?
Severe and systematic. The Catholic minority government flew the Vatican flag. Buddhists were forbidden to fly their own religious flag. Troops fired on peaceful Buddhist demonstrators, 9 killed in one incident, 67 hospitalized from tear gas in another.
Mass arrests, attacks on temples.
Yes, mass arrests of monks, nuns, leaders. Pagodas were closed, besieged by government troops, even attacked directly. This led to the shocking Buddhist response. Self-immolations. 7 monks burned themselves alive in public protest, acts that horrified the world.
What was the international reaction? The U.S. was backing Diem.
The U.S., under President Kennedy himself, a Catholic, protested. CIA payments to Diem were suspended, ambassadors were changed. But Diem, the source claims, continued his policies regardless, prioritizing his Catholic agenda.
How did it end for Diem?
Ultimately, Manhattan claims the CIA, working with disillusioned Vietnamese Buddhist elements, backed a coup. Diem and his brother Nhu were killed, ironically, captured in a Catholic church after attending Mass. Manhattan presents this as the direct result of the religious conflict they instigated.
So, Croatia and Vietnam. What's the core shared pattern Manhattan identifies?
He argues the pattern and the ultimate goal were exactly the same: the annihilation of a political enemy, communism, and an enemy church, Orthodox in Croatia, Buddhism in Vietnam, both leading, he claims, to the installation of Catholic religious and political tyranny.
And the consequence of this shared pattern?
Manhattan argues both dictators Pavelic and Diem, by putting their religion above national interests, brought their countries into the abyss. Societal collapse, immense suffering, foreign intervention.
And the chilling implication he draws.
That the church is potentially capable of carrying out the ghastly experiments of both Croatia and South Vietnam and other countries. He says the risk of another such experiment isn't just speculation, but a possibility. A warning about an alleged inherent operational method.
And he makes a final, very controversial claim about Vietnam's end.
Extremely controversial. The source claims that years before the war ended and the U.S. lost, the Vatican struck a deal with the communists of the North and actually consecrated the whole of Vietnam, that is the North and the South, to the Virgin Mary.
Consecrated the whole country, including the communist North. What's the implication?
Manhattan implies the Vatican had already switched sides, strategically positioning itself as U.S. influence waned, demonstrating alleged long-term pragmatic and ruthless political maneuvering behind the scenes.
Okay, now let's get to the core philosophy Manhattan believes explains all this. The doctrine of immutable intolerance.
Ugh.
What does the source say this is?
It claims the Church's fundamental strength and weakness is her unshakable belief that she is the only repositor of truth. Capital T, truth.
The sole holder of truth. And the logical consequence of that belief.
According to the source, it's absolute and chilling. Since it is the right of truth to eliminate error, it follows that it is her duty to eliminate anything which is not consonant with truth, namely, with her truth.
So anything not her truth is automatically error.
Ipso facto errors, yes, which she then has a duty to oppose and annihilate. This logic, Manhattan claims, empowers the Church to use any means, persuasion if possible, but force if necessary, to achieve this elimination of error.
And he sees this as a historical pattern.
Yes, he argues this faultlessly uncompromising logic and dogmatism has driven the Church's actions since the 4th century AD, since Constantine, leading to harassment of nonconformers, culminating in things like the Inquisition, which terrorized people for centuries. And crucially, the source states this immutable intolerance has never been revoked. It's still an active principle, allegedly.
The source material itself contains an internal critique of this idea.
Interestingly, yes. Manhattan's editor's note draws a stark contrast. It provocatively refers to the papacy using biblical language as the man of sin and son of perdition. It contrasts the alleged doctrine of intolerance with Jesus' teaching in the parable of the tares, letting true and false believers grow together until the harvest, implying coexistence, not forced elimination, a theological counterpoint from within the source.
And connecting back to modern times, the beatification of Stepinak is presented as evidence of this doctrine still operating.
Manhattan certainly presents it that way. Pope John Paul II beatifying Cardinal Stepinak in 1998, despite his alleged role in the Croatian Holocaust, is framed as a powerful contemporary symbol of the Church, validating its past actions and affirming this underlying stance.
The source also links this ideology to how the Jasenovac atrocities were reported later.
Yes. It mentions the 1998 arrest of Dinko Sakic, a Jasenovac commander, and a U.S. document detailing orders for 120,000 executions there. But Manhattan claims the mainstream media coverage consistently omitted the religious motivation behind the horrors.
Why would they omit that?
This silence, he argues, served to exculpate the Catholic Church from its alleged complicity in the public mind, reinforcing the pattern of denial he's been describing.
Now, we reach perhaps the most extreme and controversial part of the source. The extreme oath of the Jesuits. Where did Manhattan get this?
He presents it as revealed by a Dr. Alberto Rivera, who claimed to have accessed secret Vatican archives. Rivera apparently used these alleged documents to link the Vatican to creating both Islam and communism. Again, it's crucial, we stress. These are claims from the source material presented by Manhattan. We're reporting what the source says. Absolutely. The alleged oath itself is shocking. It begins by instructing Jesuits to be masters of deception, dissemblers, to blend in anywhere, act Catholic among Catholics, Protestant among Protestants, Jew among Jews, all to gather information, and then, when among non-Catholics, to fiercely denounce our holy religion and the Pope, but only as a tactic for the benefit of your order, deep infiltration and deception.
And it outlines a plan for global manipulation.
A truly audacious one. Jesuits are allegedly taught to insidiously plant the seeds of jealousy and hatred between communities, provinces, states, actively inciting wars, revolutions, civil wars.
Inciting conflict deliberately.
Even more, to secretly coordinate with your brother Jesuit, who might be engaged on the other side but openly opposed, only that the Church might be the gainer in the end. and that the end justifies the means. It's a claim of orchestrating global conflict for the Church's ultimate gain.
What about espionage?
A core duty, according to this alleged oath, gather all statistics, facts, and information from every source. Infiltrate the confidence of Protestants, heretics of all kinds, in schools, universities, parliaments, courts, to be all things to all men for the Pope's sake, a systematic, pervasive intelligence network.
And the obedience demanded.
Absolute. Chillingly absolute. No opinion or rule of my own or any mental reservation whatever, even as a corpse or cadaver. Perende a cadaver, but will unhesitatingly obey each and every command from my superiors. Total submission of individual will.
Then comes the extermination pledge. This sounds horrific.
It is. The alleged oath states, I will, when opportunity present, make and wage relentless war, secretly or openly, against all heretics, Protestants, and liberals, to extirpate and exterminate them from the face of the whole earth.
Exterminate them.
And that I will spare neither age, sex, or condition, and that I will hang, waste, boil, flay, strangle, and bury alive these infamous heretics, rip up the stomachs and wombs of their women, and crush their infants' heads against the walls in order to annihilate forever their execrable race.
My God. That's incredibly violent language.
And if it can't be done openly, then by stealth. The poison cup, the strangulating cord, the steel of the poniard or the leaden bullet, it's the ultimate brutal manifestation of that immutable intolerance doctrine Manhattan described.
How is such violence justified in the oath?
By claiming the Pope hath power to depose heretical kings, princes, states, commonwealths, and governments, all being illegal without his sacred confirmation, and that they may safely be destroyed. An assertion of absolute papal authority over all secular power.
And this oath is sealed somehow.
Reportedly confirmed by the Jesuits writing his name in his own blood, using a dagger dipped near the heart. Manhattan also describes a secret catechism, with signs and questions for Jesuits to identify each other, which reiterates the pledge to destroy heretics and their governments.
And the final command in this alleged oath.
Go ye then into all the world and take possession of all lands in the name of the Pope. He who will not accept him as the vicar of Jesus and his vice-regent on earth, let him be accursed and exterminated. This extreme text, as presented by Manhattan, is positioned as the underlying ideology that could explain everything else: Yugoslavia, Croatia, Malta, Vietnam. The root cause, in his view. Exactly. These claims, presented by Avro Manhattan, form the framework the source uses to interpret the historical events. Not as isolated incidents, but as expressions of a consistent underlying philosophy within the Church, this alleged immutable intolerance that, in its view, justifies eliminating all perceived error. That's the core insight Manhattan wants the reader to take away.
So we've taken a really deep dive today into Avro Manhattan's The Vatican's Holocaust in Croatia, a source that, as you've definitely heard, is uncompromising in its historical accounts. We've covered claims from the Vatican's alleged opposition to Yugoslavia's very existence,
all the way through the horrifying creation and alleged atrocities of the Independent State of Croatia, including the purported direct involvement of Catholic clergy in those terrible, terrible acts.
We also looked at Manhattan's claims about the Vatican allegedly protecting war criminals afterwards, and the supposed systematic campaign to deny or minimize what happened.
And how the source sees this as part of a repeating pattern of religious political extremism, drawing parallels to Malta and Vietnam, culminating in that deeply controversial extreme oath of the Jesuits, which the author presents as the key to understanding the underlying doctrine of immutable intolerance.
So what does this deep dive suggest for you listening at home? Given the historical claims presented in this source about the Church's stated immutable doctrines and alleged past actions, well, what implications might this history hold for understanding how religious authority and political power intersect in any time period?
It's a heavy question. We invite you to consider how knowledge of these claims, again, as presented in this specific, highly controversial source, might shape your understanding of current events or the dynamics of religious and political influence playing out today.
Definitely something to reflect on independently, based on the material we've unpacked from Manhattan's work.
Indeed.
Thank you for joining us on this intense deep dive. Until next time, keep digging, keep asking questions.
And stay well informed.